Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us live here today. You're getting the first peek at our webinar content here today. We will be speaking all about best practices to secure remote work. Yeah, we have a cybersecurity expert here today with us, Thomas Dunne. He is a strategic cybersecurity advisor here at Field Effect. Tom is bringing over 20 years of experience in Canada's security and intelligence community. That's a lot of years, Thomas. And he has vast experience in developing and leading operational and policy teams with cybersecurity challenges. So, Thomas, over to you.
Thanks, Chloe. Yeah, great to be here, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Certainly, yeah, my 20 years of experience, my kids remind me on a regular basis that I have more and more gray in my beard, showing my age. Yeah, so it's a real pleasure to be here. We're going to talk today, as Chloe mentioned, about some of the challenges that come into play with remote work and best practices when we think about securing remote work environments. I'm going to begin with a little context on the state of remote work in 2024, and then move to review some of the risks we see in remote work before turning our discussion to examining some different types of security controls that can help to minimize and mitigate cybersecurity risks in a remote work context. And then I'm going to try to close out at least the presentation with a discussion on some context of how Field Effect can help. And then, of course, as mentioned, happy to take questions with a little question and answer at the end. And Chloe, please feel free, as we go along, if in the Q&A there's like a really pertinent question that pops up, to the topic at hand, feel free to jump in and we can try and deal with things in progress if that fits well. So a little bit on the state of remote work. So here, a few kind of stats and figures to sort of capture the state of affairs. A little bit of context both in Canada and in the United States is presented here. Currently, in 2024 in Canada, about 18% of workers are classified as remote, according to Statistics Canada. If we look back at 2016, that number was only 7%. In the US context, early 2024 was about 20%. Although if we look at hybrid workers, that was captured in 2024 as accounting for about 54% of the overall US workforce. But similarly, if we were to consider only those workers who are fully remote, that's about 16% of the US workforce. So comparable to the 18% that's been observed in the Canadian context. But a little bit of a number, in terms of, for many of us, we're using Zoom today as our platform for the discussion. Of course, many of us, like here at Field Effect, and I'm sure for many of you as well, now using Microsoft Teams on a daily basis to support your virtual and remote work and engagements with partners and stakeholders and clients. In 2022, the daily track of users of Microsoft Teams was about 270 million daily users. In 2017, that number was 2 million. So just a massive, massive growth in that kind of remote engagement and virtual engagement with a platform, a collaboration platform like that. So as well, the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council in 2024 captured that about 65% of companies are currently offering remote work arrangements. So definitely it's a current and ongoing nature of work in terms of how people are structuring their work environments with their employers and employees. And this is bringing new opportunities for business. Of course, it's often more flexible and can present enhanced work-life balance for employees. So certainly it can be an appealing option for many in terms of their work environment. And it's often a combination or a mix of both mobile and cloud-based work in terms of the types of applications and solutions that people use. Remote work also can mean that information is shared, of course, must be shared and accessible from almost anywhere. So that is both flexibility, but cost efficiency also for businesses. So with this, brings, of course, new risks when it comes to cybersecurity. So talking about risks of remote work, like why is it that remote work is a concern when it comes to cybersecurity. So like me, as Chloe was mentioning, with my 20 years of experience, or a little more than that, some of us and I'm sure with many of you who've had, long histories in the cyber defense domain, remote work presents challenges because it's changed the nature of how we understand our networks. So, in the past, we had and recognized and understood definitive boundaries to our networks that we could see and understand. We would work to try and make those network boundaries as impenetrable as possible, with a sense that those who were inside the boundary were safe from compromise and attack. Over the years, technological evolution, rise of remote work, certainly it exploded during the pandemic, and since has kind of leveled out a little bit. Changes in the cyber threat landscape, all of those things have kind of whittled away at that impenetrable outer wall, where now we recognize and advise that we have to approach cybersecurity from a defense in-depth focus. So really that we need multiple layers of defense. We know now that a single outer wall is going to be insufficient to protect our users and networks and data. So some old colleagues of mine, used to describe this kind of scenario as, you might think of it that in the past, you could imagine incarnations of network security that were kind of like a cookie with a hard, crunchy exterior, and it, that then would have a soft and chewy inside. Where today we know that a soft and chewy internal network with no boundaries on the inside and no layered defenses on the inside is going to be easy pickings for determined threat actors that might find a foothold. And so that's going to be an insufficient kind of setup and arrangement when it comes to network security. So, as you see here, into the mid 70s in terms of percentage of business executives who perceive that remote work, despite its advantages, is introducing increased cybersecurity risk. And that many also believe that remote work is an extreme risk to cybersecurity. So things like phishing, of course, this is absolutely persistent. Remote work expands the threat surface. So as I was describing, we don't recognize necessarily the network domains and boundaries the way we used to. And that the implication of that is that a different and expanded or more malleable network boundary means a larger threat surface for threat actors to approach and probe and try and compromise. Reduced network visibility. Of course, we don't always know now, depending on how people are connecting to your network and your environment, where they might be doing it from. We may not have the same tools or ability to observe activity as it's coming in or going out. So this can also mean increased physical security risks for corporate data that lives outside of the traditional office. So depending on how employees connect and where they do it from, that can introduce physical security risks for where they have corporate devices. And of course, we've talked about third-party cloud applications, even in the introduction, something like Microsoft Teams or other sharing applications, that these introduce new means of file sharing, data storage, and communications that have to be taken into consideration when we think about both risks and then security controls that can mitigate those risks. So we've talked a little bit about threat surface. A threat surface refers to, if we look to understand that, this is talking about all of the possible points within a system or network or application that can be exploited by a threat actor. That if they do exploit it, they're going to gain unauthorized access by compromising your security and then performing additional malicious activities. So your threat surface overall represents, the collection of vulnerabilities or entry points, potential attack vectors that a threat actor can use to target and breach an organization's defenses and then compromise its assets. So one thing that's important, I was talking about defense in depth and kind of that, the exterior crunchy wall versus the soft, chewy interior. Threat surface needs to be considered in the same kind of context. It's both external and internal. External threat surface is talking about things that are accessible from outside your network or your perimeter. So whether it's systems, services, devices that are, these are directly exposed to the internet or they're accessible remotely. that's part of your external threat surface. So things that are going to be targeted, in activities such as phishing or brute force attempts and attacks, or remote exploitations of known vulnerabilities for software applications or operating systems. When we think about internal threat surface, the inside of your network also has potential vulnerabilities within your network, that if an external vulnerability were compromised, that a threat actor would then look to understand the internal architecture or internal setup that you have and look for additional vulnerabilities or access points into other resources and corporate assets that you have. So that's systems, devices, or applications, user accounts that could be exploited by insiders or external threat actors who've gained unauthorized access to your network. So overall, I think the lesson here is that the larger the threat surface, the greater the potential for exploitation and the higher the risk to an organization's security. So in our view, organizations need to understand and manage their threat surfaces effectively in order to minimize that collection of vulnerabilities and protect against cyber threat or cyber attack. So understanding your threat surface means understanding who's connecting to your corporate resources, from where, over what means, and for what purpose. So, it's thinking about the kind of traditional who, what, where, when, why, to think about what is it that's, or what types of means or applications or things are available, both from an exterior point of view and internally to users on your network, and then being able to understand what is happening and when. So as your threat surface changes over time, like in the context of the evolution of remote work, cybersecurity practices need to change as well. How to sort of conceive and understand of cracks in your threat surface and what that means when we think about remote work. So put another way, what are some concrete examples of vulnerabilities or security practices that are going to increase your exposure to compromise from threat actors? Now, as we go along, we'll see that reducing your threat surface for these vulnerabilities can require a mix of solutions, some that are technical, some that are procedural or policy-based, and some that are really people-focused. So, we always approach questions of cybersecurity and advice and guidance with our clients from that sort of people, process, technology perspective, that all three of those domains are going to really give a holistic kind of overall picture of a set of practices and then an ability to provide recommendations or guidance for how to improve security practices overall. So some more obvious ones here, of course, in terms of phishing attacks, as I mentioned, pervasive and persistent, often lead to business email compromise, which can lead to financial fraud situations or data loss from email and other sources within your environment. Poor password practices, because whether passwords are weak or reused between accounts and applications, still something that we see, where users are reusing passwords across personal or business accounts, and that then if a password is compromised from a data leak in other places, can then be leveraged by threat actors in trying to compromise other sources of information and networks. As well, absence of multi-factor authentication or absence of secure remote connectivity solutions, such as secure virtual private networks. These are things that will increase your threat surface and make it more difficult to protect your environment from compromise. Multi-factor authentication itself, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, one of the most effective means of reducing account compromise. Because of course, even in a situation where a threat actor might compromise an individual's set of credentials, their username and password, if MFA is in place, the greatest likelihood is that they would still be unable to access that account and to further any additional compromise. Ideally, in that type of situation, there would be an organizational awareness or an alert, related to the fact that an account password may have been compromised, and then that could be changed. So a much easier and more efficient mitigation and minimization of that risk than having to deal with a full-blown account compromise or business email compromise. Personal device use for corporate connectivity, something, of course, that is present and prevalent for a lot of organizations due to added convenience for employees, some cost efficiency, but we have to recognize that it introduces cybersecurity risk. That in many places, personal devices are often shared between household members or in household environments. That can introduce cybersecurity risks depending on who's using a device or for what purpose. And that also, there may be an inability to monitor or enforce security controls and practices on personal devices. It introduces a greater degree of unknowns. So to the extent possible, our recommendation is always to minimize the amount of personal device use to the greatest extent that you can. Lastly, insufficient network device and cloud monitoring. In many cases, for those of you who may have been with us for past webinars, you would have heard us describe, sort of a first step always to implement security monitoring holistically. So for your network, for devices and endpoints that you have, and for cloud solutions that you use, that being able to have that visibility and awareness to what's happening on your network and with your users is a massive and significant advantage in reducing your threat surface. Now, kind of having some of that context and background on threat surface, let's talk a little bit about the evolution of remote work and risk and security controls that can help reduce risks. The first we're going to talk about is security awareness. I'm going to talk about a few others as well. But security awareness and cultures of security is going to be the first one that I'm going to dive into. And then we're going to turn to a little bit more specifics about some technical controls and improved technical controls for as a fundamental part of enhancing cybersecurity resilience. And then lastly, just as some foreshadowing, we'll turn it, as I mentioned earlier, to some of the ways that field effect can help kind of across this whole discussion. So in that, we'll touch on the field effect MDR service and some of field effect's professional services as well. So in that, I'm talking about things like cybersecurity assessments, our incident response readiness service, and phishing simulations. So a bit more to come on those. But ultimately, the message here, I think, is that understanding your threat surface, knowing what's happening in your environment is a critical element of reducing your risk of compromise, and identifying what to do in the event of an incident, who should be doing what and when, is equally fundamental to be able to reduce the impact of any cyber incident on your organization. So all of these are areas where field effect can be of assistance. So to dig into this, we're going to talk about first what I call a principle-based approach to securing remote work. So in that, sort of 5 main principles that can form the basis for improving your management of remote work and reducing your threat surface. So these are all kind of framed as principled, short, concise statements of we will, try to do these things. So first off, ensuring the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of corporate systems and data. So we're going to dig into that a little bit more and what that means. We will nurture a mature cybersecurity program through improved cybersecurity awareness and focus on people, processes, and technology. So that's sort of that holistic approach that I was talking about. We will employ a managed detection and response solution for real-time 24/7 monitoring of the network, cloud services, and endpoints. So that's that first step that I mentioned, that having an always-on monitoring service is of critical importance. We will keep remote workers top of mind for securing device and account connectivity. So that's really a culture kind of mindset approach, that knowing that if our workers are taking advantage of the kinds of flexibility that remote work can provide, that we are approaching that with eyes wide open at all times to understand what kinds of risks that might introduce, and then looking to ensure that wherever we can, that we are applying appropriate security controls to try and minimize or mitigate any of the risks that it might introduce. So in that, lastly, we will ensure that remote work connectivity is secured. So where we can, employing secure VPN for access to corporate resources, and employing multi-factor authentication wherever possible. So as I mentioned, one of the most significant steps that can be taken to reduce the risk of account compromise and thus of compromise of corporate resources. The CIA of security controls are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is an important way to think about security controls, it's a meaningful concept for why they matter. You've probably heard of this before, the CIA triad, as it's often referred to. We've talked about it previously in earlier webinars on cyber resilience and improving a cybersecurity program. But to kind of briefly recap these elements. So for confidentiality, the idea there is that corporate data should stay private. That is, it has an intended audience. And we need to use security controls to ensure its confidentiality. Corporate data also needs to be stored safely to ensure that it hasn't been altered from its intended or original form. That is, security controls will help to ensure its integrity. And lastly, that corporate data needs to be accessible when you need it from wherever you need to access it from. And that this is a big part, of course, of remote work environments. So we need to use security controls to ensure its availability. So overall, applying effective security controls to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability increases overall levels of trust and reliability in your practices and across an organization. So security awareness. I've got a few slides here to touch on security awareness and different aspects of security awareness. Really, this is about a culture. I talked about in those principles, a culture of cybersecurity and awareness. Overall, things like security awareness training, that should be available and applicable for all employees within an organization, but might also be tailored for certain specific audiences, such as the C-suite or those who might have particularly high exposure to cyber threat actors based on their role. So perhaps, that might be members of financial staff or sometimes HR staff. So overall, that building that culture of awareness helps to reduce human error, also helps to socialize employees to the critical role that they play in helping to protect your organization and your data. So that culture of security and creating and reinforcing that culture of security helps to provide guidance for employees on what they should do in the event of an incident, how to report something, who to talk to, and how they should react. So also in terms of phishing, having something like a phishing reporting service gives users a way to safely report a message that appears suspicious. So this is just simply an example of a tool or a security control, security solution that can help to build and maintain that culture of awareness. So a service is going to help to build an understanding and reinforce that when a user receives a suspicious email, of course, they should wait and not interact with it if they can submit it for review and get some feedback as to, how concerned do I need to be about this message? Is it malicious? Is there something about it that I should avoid doing? Ideally, of course, don't click on anything. Don't enter a username or password. So in our case, the Field Effects Suspicious Email Analysis Service provides exactly this kind of support and backstop. Whereas, and then when an email is submitted, that a response can be received directly to the submitter with an indication of what SEAS has found or not found, as the case may be, about a particular message, providing some guidance and advice on how to react and what to do. A little bit more, in the context of security awareness, of course, it's a great way to help combat financial fraud. So documenting and sharing, discussing, formal processes that might revolve around invoicing, payment processing, bank account information, or whenever it might be necessary to change bank account details, identity validation processes outside of email. So recognizing that financial fraud and business email compromise often go hand in hand, and that email is often used as a means to try and manipulate members of an organization into providing information that is going to be, to the advantage of the threat actor. So overall, building that culture of security awareness helps to reduce risk of financially motivated business email compromise and financial loss for an organization. Similarly, and related to this, we talked about building a cybersecurity program and a positive one that provides guidance and direction when it comes to those domains of people and processes and technology. So a cybersecurity policy framework can help in this context. Policies can help to formalize and strengthen an organization's cybersecurity program, because implementing policies can standardize roles and responsibilities and expected behaviors for all employees. So as I mentioned, similar to earlier, these kinds of things help to educate staff on the role they play in securing your network, and helps to enable them to make better decisions and manage risk. In general, cybersecurity policies provide guidance in a number of areas, but a couple particular areas that are highly relevant for securing remote work. So things like a password policy. It sets guidance on strong password creation and storage, and we would recommend also on the use of a password manager for doing so. That's going to help ensure that users are creating better and stronger passwords, but also that they're not reusing passwords across different accounts or applications. An acceptable use policy will help to set guidance on what employees should do or not do when using corporate or personal devices to connect to your corporate environment and resources. And related to that, a bring your own device policy. So I talked earlier about our recommendation or guidance that as much as possible to minimize the use of personal devices, because we recognize that it's a practice that is in place in many organizations. So a bring your own device policy is going to help to provide direction and guidance for personal device use, to hopefully minimize and to help to provide minimum security requirements for connecting a personal device to your corporate network. So for example, there may be a requirement to install a corporate mobile device monitoring software or application. Such a policy might also provide guidance or protocols to be followed if a device is lost or stolen when that device has been used to connect to corporate resources. And it may also enforce additional restrictions that would apply to personal device use and provide clarity regarding an individual end user's role for securing corporate data when they're using that device. So that overall, that helps to maintain that confidentiality, integrity, and availability of corporate data. But a bring your own device policy would also set some expectation and clarity around privacy practices and expectations when it comes to personal device use that are often top of mind for employees, especially if there is an awareness that some measure of monitoring would be in place. And as well, a device policy would provide minimum standards for approved operating systems or software applications that should be used or avoided. And importantly, also providing direction around types or classes of data that can or should not be accessed or stored on a personal device in the bring your own device kind of context. So lastly, a cybersecurity champion, again, a big part of setting that culture of awareness, sets a top-down tone for an organization regarding cybersecurity awareness, good practices, champions the kind of ongoing evolution and advancements of your cybersecurity program overall, including things like ensuring that remote connectivity is done properly and securely by everyone. So overall, it is very much a leadership role and can relate to guiding cybersecurity investments over time for improving and maintaining a cybersecurity program as an organization grows and evolves. Lastly, in terms of the sort of awareness aspect of this is incident response readiness, and importantly, and in the context of the importance of an incident response plan. So having one being one of the most important parts of a cybersecurity program. So having an incident response plan that's documented and shared within an organization, in particular, of course, for those who are responsible for responding to an incident, is going to provide guidance and direction on how the organization is going to do those things. So many incident response plans will include or have associated playbooks that will guide specific response phases and steps or activities when dealing with some of the most common types of cyber incidents. So things like ransomware or malware or business email compromises. So setting the context of how is this going to happen? How are we going to reduce response times or reduce costs of response when we face such an incident? And overall, the purpose of an incident response plan is to minimize the impact to your organization should an incident happen. So a critical part of a cybersecurity program and overall sort of awareness within an organization. Here, there's a snapshot from the Field Effect portal in terms of policy templates that are available for our clients. That includes templates for incident response plans and communications plans as well. So moving next to some technical security controls when we're talking about remote work. So first things first, I talked about this earlier, managed detection and response, security monitoring. So for me, as an MDR solution is about real-time monitoring. It's about telling me what's happening on my network and telling me, importantly, what I should do about those things. So it's guidance. It's about taking defensive actions on my behalf where that may be warranted. So this in practice means identification of vulnerabilities or suspicious account activity, identification of suspicious activity on an endpoint device within my network, or correlation of suspicious activity across cloud accounts. So all of this comes into play with an MDR solution, fundamentally important in terms of reducing risk and threat surface overall, and very much should be at play in the context of securing remote work. So some additional best practice for remote work security controls. So of course, you know, the strong practices are more than just an ounce of prevention, kind of another sort of a principled idea in terms of why these things matter. So building out from or beyond the MDR solution, what other kinds of things, you know, should be considered? Account protection, email and account protection and phishing prevention, secure remote connectivity. We touched on things like secure VPN, user access controls, so role-based access controls and least privilege, or the approach of zero trust. You know, you may have heard in the past things like trust but verify. You know, now I think it's you know, verified before trusting is perhaps the current approach in terms of layered defenses, and minimizing personal device use, which I touched on a couple of times. So I'll try and briefly hit on each one of these a little bit more. So account protection, again, password practices more. So now taking the password policy theory, putting it into practice. Strong password creation, it's imperative for protecting your environment. We would recommend also employing a password manager, as I mentioned, to create and store passwords. Multi-factor authentication, effective MFA implementation is going to reduce the chance of account compromise by as much as 99%. So really can't be overstated how significant MFA is in terms of reducing risk of compromise and reducing your threat surface. So there too, like for some organizations, it's a question of culture change in terms of not everyone is familiar or comfortable with using MFA solutions, or especially really strong MFA solutions such as pin-based or other solutions. And it's really a question of becoming accustomed to the practice based on the importance of its security value in minimizing threat surface and risk. Things like conditional access policies as well can help to govern access to organizational resources, either flagging alerts or denying access based on things that fall outside of the parameters of the set policy. Another really effective way to minimize risk to accounts and thus the data that they provide access to. Email protection and phishing. So we had some snapshots earlier in terms of things like suspicious email analysis services, think spam filtering, attachment scanning, quarantining, link validations. These are all things that I think many of us would know as fairly standard now within modern email security solutions, but nonetheless worth mentioning in terms of their importance and value as far as protecting email and users from malicious email. Logging, massively important in terms of being able to tell a story of what has happened in the event of an incident. So that ability to look into the past and understand what has happened is going to come from having, you know, authentication and audit logs or inbox rule auditing and retaining those logs for a sufficient period of time to be able to support that kind of analysis. Secure remote connectivity. So there's a few snapshots here in terms of some recent blogs and posts and analysis posts from Field Effect, recent sonic wall vulnerabilities which have been reported. And which we have witnessed, you know, being leveraged, or threat actors attempting to leverage and exploit recent sonic wall vulnerabilities. The Field Effect blog is available, of course, on Field Effect's website, has some descriptive information there in terms of security best practices and how they relate to VPNs and why they matter. But ultimately, that this is about providing a secure single point of entry into your network, allowing your users when external to your network to securely access your resources and services without exposing them to the internet. So when implemented, a really significant reduction in threat surface and minimizing risk overall. So I won't belabor the point in terms of passwords and MFA, but applies, of course, in terms of remote connectivity. And ultimately, these things, again, relate to what I mentioned earlier in terms of understanding who's connecting, from where, when, and how. User access controls. So the principle of least privilege is really all about applying and providing only the amount of permissions and privilege that a user needs to perform their function. Everything else should be off limits. Segmenting privileged accounts from user accounts. Here, very much recognizing that super users or people with administrative privileges, those accounts have the ability to do powerful things across your network and are highly coveted by threat actors. So ensuring that that type of privilege and power exists only to the minimum need and only to those individuals who really need it is something that's really important to limit risk and reduce your threat surface. Importantly as well, understanding the ability, again, to tell the story of what has happened. So auditing accounts regularly. We see in many circumstances in context of incident response that one of the most important things that can help us understand what a threat actor may have done, for example, moving laterally inside a network, is knowing being able to tell a story of how they manipulated or abused privileged user accounts from one device to another or one part of a network to another. Personal device use. So we've talked about this a fair bit already. And I hit on the context of these kinds of cybersecurity risks, about insufficient monitoring, lack of security controls, or inability to apply the same security controls that you would to corporate devices. You may have an unknown status on the nature of software and tools or solutions and applications that exist on a personal device. Are they updated regularly? Are vulnerabilities patched or known? Those are things that are more difficult to manage in the context of personal device use. How do we mitigate that when personal device use is something that is happening or permitted? As much as possible, logging all connections. Again, MFA, required for access to corporate resources. And as I mentioned, all the important context of a bring your own device policy and the kind of direction and guidance that would provide. So how can Field Effect help? Field Effect MDR, or Field Effect Managed Detection and Response, is very much real-time monitoring, of course. It is about network, endpoint, and cloud protection, threat surface reduction, and at its heart, the identification of suspicious activity. So that risk mitigation, comes from, as I mentioned, the ability of the solution to tell you what is happening and to provide you guidance on what to do about it. And to do that in a way that is, that is highly, that is clear, that is concise and prioritized in terms of the kinds of mitigations that may need to be taken in the response to any identified suspicious activity. So one of the important aspects there, we describe as active response. And then basically, you could describe that as the ability to isolate or freeze, if you will, either a compromised account or an endpoint within your environment that may have been compromised by a threat actor. The idea in doing so is to isolate that device or that account before a threat actor could cause any further damage to an account or to your network. So again, that is about minimizing impact, reducing time of response, such that the cost and impact of the organization in the event of any incident is as small as possible. So overall, Field Effect MDR clients can, as I mentioned, add the suspicious email analysis service, which we saw earlier, to their email toolbar and turn on seized responses for submitters. That helps to provide that additional backstop and support in determining whether or not an email is suspicious or malicious and should be avoided or deleted and reported. The DNS firewall as well. provides an additional means of protecting users from malicious sites based on known malicious activity and threat actor activity. So all in all, the real-time support and aspect of the field effect MDR service is of significant benefit for organizations, and an area where we would be more than happy to talk about its possible benefit for you. I wanted to mention too professional services that we have. So all three that are mentioned here, so cybersecurity assessments, the incident response readiness service, and phishing simulations. These at their heart have three of the same purposes. Firstly, identifying existing strengths in your practices, such that you know the things that you need to maintain and keep doing. They also are designed to help you identify gaps in your security controls or in your policies and procedures. So again, coming back to that people, processes, technology, all three of these are designed to capture areas of strength, areas of gaps, and thus, thirdly, to provide prioritized plans for mitigating gaps or vulnerabilities. So assessments are all about determining a relative level of cyber resilience and maturing an overall cybersecurity program. Incident response readiness, it is focused at its center on the importance of the incident response plan, as I mentioned earlier, ultimately working with clients to help them be better prepared to respond to an incident, and very much to help them evaluate and understand their current threat surface as picture. Phishing simulations, valuable tool for helping employees verify their understanding and ability to recognize a suspicious email and how that can be done. So that's over and above something like the suspicious email analysis service, but really about enhancing an organization's resilience against social engineering and phishing attacks. So I know we've covered a lot today. Overall, looking at the state of the world with remote work, that this brings, of course, new opportunities for organizations, a real kind of balance now between employees who work fully remote and employees who work a hybrid mix of both sort of in-office and remote work. That there's, a lot that while that it comes with both risk and benefit. But also that, we've discussed sort of the first principles of securing remote work and some best practices in our view that will help you secure remote work environments. And ultimately that, we would love to help. If you are interested in discussing any of the services that Field Effect offers or how they can be of assistance to you, absolutely, it would be our pleasure to dig into all of these in more detail. So I'm going to stop now and turn back to Chloe.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for running us through all super relevant, timely, and very, very important information as the world has shifted to more and more remote work or even that hybrid situation. Certainly more education and things to keep in mind when it comes from a cybersecurity lens. So thank you for that. We do have a few questions to get through. The first one being more of a comment than a question, and it was in relation to speaking to the dangers of personal device use being a potential way into a breach. Somebody just commented, yeah, asked LastPass about that one. So I just take that to be the LastPass breach that had occurred was due to a personal device. This is in relation to security awareness. You had gone through there maybe being a need for different types of security awareness training for different groups of people. The question is, what would be the difference in security training for a C-suite versus a standard employee?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think definitely there would be some overlap between the two. In some circumstances for the C-suite, it may depend on the organization and the nature of their industry sector or the kinds of industry verticals that they're involved in, because that may relate to different types of threats that they might face, either as individuals, that is, as members of the executive within an organization, or based on for the organization overall. So that the difference there, I think, is really one of trying to ensure that overall everyone within an organization is aware of the kinds of threats that an organization can face and their role in helping to defend a network and an organization. but for the C-suite as well to understand that they may face additional or more tailored attacks that can target executives within an organization and their sort of presence on the internet on behalf of an organization.
Next question. It's about on creating a culture of security. It was around that sort of slide. And the question is, do you think organizations will ever put an end to negativity when an employee makes a mistake, when they click the link, etc.?
I guess I would answer that by saying I hope so. I hope that I don't think that in my view, and I think in our view where we stand on that is, that shame is not necessarily an effective motivator. So negative reinforcement, in terms of engagement with a suspicious email, such as clicking on a link, I think the better approach is one where an organization provides regular and recurring awareness training, phishing simulations, and then also of course, the security solutions to backstop the employee. So ideally, there are tools used within an organization's email to help identify potentially suspicious emails and report them, and then to provide the guidance and training for employees to know that they should report an email prior to engaging with it. And then ideally that gives them, a leg up in both identifying the suspicious communication and then knowing that they haven't interacted with it. Importantly, though, I would say that sometimes the reporting might only follow the click, because some threat actors are crafty. They're creative in the way that they do phishing and social engineering. So it's a bit difficult to suggest that it should only be the employee's responsibility to never click on a suspicious link or something like that, or submit a password, a username and password somewhere. We have to recognize that the submission or the reporting may only come after the engagement or the activity. So the best practice, in my view, is a positive reaction. One, you've done the right thing by reporting. Ideally, you were able to recognize and report that suspicious activity as quickly as possible, even after you've clicked or submitted a username or a password, because the sooner that reporting happens, the sooner it's possible for an organization to mitigate any additional risk. So that might be because they can change the password for that user and ensure that their account is reset. They can ensure that multi-factor authentication is in place for the account and for all other accounts, or then ensuring, examining that individual's device or workstation for any evidence of other malicious activity. So the sooner an organization knows, the better, because they can take other defensive actions. And the best way to make that happen is to positively reinforce the reporting. I think if the response from an organization is a negative one or shame-based, if you will, it's probably going to result in less reporting of potentially suspicious activity as opposed to more.
Another question here, do you offer support for clients who are just starting out and are just beginning to draft a security strategy plan, security incident response plan, security event response plan, etc.?
Yeah, we do, definitely. So that within the professional services that we have, such as the cybersecurity assessments, of which there are a couple of different types, and the incident response readiness service, within those, there would probably be a great fit for how to collaborate on that development and on that path, depending on an organization's relative position. So are they at the beginning of their journey, or have they gone some distance already to developing a program and having a plan, etc.? Having a conversation about that and where they stand, what their objectives and goals are, would help us determine the best service that would be most appropriate and most applicable. But absolutely, yeah, it's the kind of engagement that we love to have and have all the time.
So thank you, Thomas, again for your time today and sharing your with us. And thank you, everybody who stuck around right till the end. Just a reminder that this session will be sent out. The recording of it will be sent out. And again, please feel free to share that with a colleague who you think it might be helpful to, a friend, what have you. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.